The best summer memories are made outside, and LL Bean has the clothing and gear you need to make these memories. Their effortless styles are created for summer spent outside with family and friends. Like hand-sewn boat shoes, coastal cotton sweaters, rugged polos, and, of course, the iconic boat and tote, which has been made right here in Maine since 1944. LL Bean. Be an outsider. Visit llbean.com to learn more.
Zootopia 2 has come home to Disney+.
Let's go!
Get ready for a new case.
We're gonna crack this case and prove we're the greatest partners of all time!
New friends.
You are...
Gary the Snake.
And your last name?
The Snake.
Dream team. And new habitats.
Zootopia has a secret reptile population.
You can watch the record-breaking phenomenon at home.
You're clearly working at
Zootopia 2. Now available on Disney+, rated PG.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of True Crime with Caitlyn. On last week's episode, I told you all about the unsolved murders of Eve Stratford and Lynn Whedon, a young woman and teenage girl who were both murdered in London in 1975. Their cases weren't linked until over 30 years later, when DNA from both scenes officially linked them. I rounded off that episode mentioning the suspicion that many people share that Eve and Lynn's killer didn't stop at just them. Today I'm going to share with you 3 other cases whose murders share similarities to that of Eve and Lynn. I'm going to take you through all the comparisons and you can decide if you think that they link. If you haven't listened to last week's episode yet, I would recommend going and doing that just to get a clearer picture, but if not, it's fine because I'm going to run through all of it anyway. This is the murders of Elizabeth Parravicini, Linda Faroh, and Patsy Morris. Elizabeth Parravicini was born on the 2nd of August 1950 in Ealing, West London. Her father was named George and she had big dreams of becoming an actress. On the 9th of September 1977, Elizabeth had spent the evening out with her friends going to the cinema to see the iconic Casablanca, a film I still haven't actually watched. After this, she got the tube home, getting off in the Osterley area at around about midnight, and began her what should have been about 10-minute walk home. She walked down past St Mary's Church and turned onto Osterley Road. She was a stone's throw away from her home when she was attacked. 27-year-old Elizabeth was struck over the head with a blunt instrument with so much force that it fractured her skull, and this injury would go on to kill her. Her attacker then picked up Elizabeth and threw her over a wall, dragging her to a bushy, concealed area. It's believed that he had intentions of sexually assaulting or raping Elizabeth. However, something spooked him, maybe someone walking past or maybe a car approaching, and so the attacker fled before he could do anything else, leaving Elizabeth behind. Early the next morning, upon realising that his daughter hadn't returned home, George went out looking for her. He began walking the route that he knew Elizabeth would have walked from the tube station, and it was actually him who discovered his daughter's body. When police arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the surrounding area repeatedly, but they were unable to locate the murder weapon. After releasing a photo fit of a man they wanted to speak to, they would actually receive over 60 phone calls with tips and began to meticulously work through them. Early on in the investigation, some people grew suspicious of one man in particular, who just so happened to be an ex-Metropolitan Police officer. This man was actually suspected by some of his own colleagues. When he was questioned in relation to Elizabeth's killing, he was serving an over 5-year sentence for sex crimes relating to, quote, terrorising schoolgirls. He lived close to the scene of the murder, being no more than a half an hour walk away from his home. His MO included roaming the streets at night looking for victims, and that he had a history of making harassing phone calls, which we know from last week's episode was something that was happening to Eve Stratford. This man was extensively questioned, but apparently was able to provide a suitable alibi, and so he was completely ruled out. Meanwhile, quite quickly, the similarities between Elizabeth's case and the murder of Lynn Whedon became glaring. Lynn's case is one that I covered in last week's episode, but both of the victims were attacked while walking home alone in the very late hours, when it was pitch black, Lynn being attacked after 11 p.m. and Elizabeth after midnight. They were both attacked in quite close proximity. They were within about a mile of each other. It was suspected that the killer must have had local knowledge to know of the alleyway where Lynn was attacked, and he must have been a local. Both victims had been struck over the head with a blunt force instrument, resulting in fractured skulls. Once debilitated, they were both moved to different locations. Lynn was sexually assaulted, which it's believed that was what the intention was with Elizabeth's attack. So that's quite a few very similar circumstances. Despite the best efforts of police and detectives, the investigation into Elizabeth Parravicini's murder went cold and is still unsolved. Linda Faroh was a 29-year-old mother of two who was 4 months pregnant with her third baby. She worked at the International Sports Club in Mayfair and lived in a house on Whitehall Road in the Chingford area of northeast London with her boyfriend. On the 19th of January 1979, Linda had been out picking up a bit of shopping. When she arrived home, she parked up outside of her house and started carrying her shopping bags in when she heard the phone ringing. Distracted, she went to answer it, leaving her door open behind her. Unbeknownst to Linda, someone, more than likely, who had been waiting for her arrival, or just an evil person who saw this as an opportunity, followed her into the house. We know that this was in the early afternoon time, as later a young girl who was walking past the house after finishing school for the day thought that she heard a baby cry coming from inside of the house. But this wasn't a baby seeking comfort or food or a nappy change. This was Linda begging for her life. Armed with a knife that the killer had stolen from her very own kitchen, he began to attack Linda, repeatedly stabbing her, slashing at her as she fought for not just her life, but her unborn babies. Linda sustained black eyes, bruises, she had wounds to her face and the back of her head as a result of the struggle, alongside the many stab wounds, some of them being to her stomach and some across her neck. This monster had slit her throat. Linda's hands were described as being shredded from her trying to get hold of the knife to stop the attack, to stop this monster from killing her and her baby. Linda Faroh would heartbreakingly be discovered in a pool of her own blood by her two young daughters. As soon as Linda's mother Gladys heard about the devastating news that her daughter had been barbarically murdered, she had someone in mind who she thought could have been responsible straight away, and that was Linda's ex-husband, Paul Farrow. Linda and Paul got into a relationship when they were both still relatively young. They were in their teenage years. They eventually got married, but from almost day dot, it wasn't a happy marriage. It was an abusive one. Their children would report witnessing their dad abusing their mother. Paul would hit Linda with his fists. If she was on the phone, he would rip it out of her hand and start to strike her with it. On at least one occasion, he wrapped the cord of the phone around her neck and strangled her with it. This went on for years and completely changed the type of person that Linda was. She went from being a happy-go-lucky young woman who was outgoing to miserable and in a constant state of anxiety. She eventually, very bravely, left Paul, taking the children with her. Linda gets into a new relationship and moves into the Whitehall Road home. She begins working at the sports bar and then she falls pregnant with her new boyfriend. This was the start of a brand new life for Linda, but that was ripped away from her. It was entirely possible, probable even, that Paul could have been the one to commit this heinous murder. The killing was so violent and up close that it seemed personal to the detectives. Whoever had done this to Lynda was angry, enraged at her. They wanted to hurt her and cause as much devastation as humanly possible. There were a lot of comparisons that were made between the murder of Linda Faroh and Eve Stratford, who again I covered last week. Both of the women were in their 20s, and you could say that they had a visual resemblance. They were both beautiful blondes. There was a theory that maybe Eve's killer could have had an obsession with her, so it's not outlandish to think that he would target blonde women. Eve and Lynda both worked in establishments that kind of brought in the same type of customer, Eve in the Playboy Club and Lynda in a sports bar. Both of the women were murdered in the moments after arriving back into their homes, and even in similar times of the day too. Eve arrived back to her flat near on 3:30 in the afternoon, and Lynda was also attacked in the afternoon time. In both instances, it seems like the killer had laid in wait for the women arriving home. Distance-wise, there was only around about 4 miles between both of the murder scenes. Despite sharing similarities with their injuries, both women having their throats slit by men who were left-handed, there's some differences there too. Lynda had an altercation, a very obvious struggle with her killer. The knife used for the killing was left at Lynda's crime scene. It was also a weapon that he didn't arrive with, but that wasn't the same in Eve's case. Paul Farrow was questioned by the police, and whatever he said seemed to satisfy them because they didn't believe that he was involved and he was ruled out in relation with the murder of his ex-wife. 30 years later, when DNA evidence officially linked the murders of Eve Stratford and Lynn Whedon, police thought that if they uploaded whatever DNA profile they had from Lynda's crime scene, that might link her murder too, tying all 3 of them together, which would have been absolutely terrifying. This meant that there was a serial killer prowling London. I'm not sure exactly what DNA they had from Lynda's scene because a lot of the evidence that they had, including the knife, was somehow lost. But using whatever they had, they discovered that Lynda's murder wasn't connected to Eve or Lynn by DNA. To this day, we still have no idea who brutally murdered Linda Faroh and her unborn baby. Her case still being unsolved.
Eczema is unpredictable, but you can flare less with Ebglyss, a once-monthly treatment for moderate to severe eczema. After an initial 4-month or longer dosing phase, about 4 in 10 people taking Eczema achieved itch relief and clear or almost clear skin at 16 weeks. And most of those people maintain skin that's still more clear at 1 year with monthly dosing.
Ebglyss, lebrikizumab LBKZ, a 250 mg per 2 milliliter injection, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults and children 12 years of age and older who weigh at least 88 pounds or 40 kilograms with moderate to severe eczema, also called atopic dermatitis, that is not well controlled with prescription therapies used on the skin or topicals, or who cannot use topical therapies. Ebglyss can be used with or without topical corticosteroids. Don't use if you're allergic to Ebglyss. Allergic reactions can occur that can be severe. Eye problems can occur. Tell your doctor if you have new or worsening eye problems. You should not receive a live vaccine when treated with Ebglyss. Before starting Ebglyss, tell your doctor if you have a parasitic infection.
Ask your doctor about Ebglyss and visit ebglyss.lilly.com or call 1-800-LILY-RX or 1-800-545-5979.
Patricia Joyce Morris was born on the 10th of January 1966 in Birmingham. She was one of 2 children from her parents, George and Marjorie Morris. They would describe her as a good girl who always listened to them. The family moved from Birmingham and settled in the Isleworth area of West London, and here the children all attended Feltham Comprehensive School. On the 16th of June 1980, Patricia, who went by the nickname Patsy, walked out of school at dinner time. She told her friends that she was going to be heading back to her home on Sargent Avenue to get changed. That morning, she hadn't worn a coat to school, and she must have gotten caught in a rain shower, so she had been sitting in damp clothes all morning, and so come lunchtime, she wanted to go home so that she could get changed. Upon arriving back at her home, she found the house empty and locked. She couldn't get inside because she had forgotten her house key. It was probably inside of the pocket of the coat that she had forgotten. It's likely, of course we have absolutely no way of knowing for certain, that Patsy decided to make her way towards her dad's work. He was a chef within the nearby cavalry barracks, so Patsy probably wanted to go to his work to get his house key, making her way there by cutting across the Hounslow Heath, a rather big stretch of greenery and woodland. But she would never make it. When Patsy didn't show back up at school, this didn't really raise any red flags for our friends. That afternoon she had a double history lesson, which she was partial to skiving, so not seeing her there wasn't unusual, or something that would make their heads turn. When she didn't return home, however, that was incredibly unlike her, and she was quickly reported missing to the police. In so many cases, we hear that parents get told that they have to wait a certain amount of hours before action can be taken, but thankfully, that wasn't the case in this case. For this one, police came out full throttle trying to find Patsy. Hundreds of officers scoped the surrounding area on foot, accompanied by dogs. Helicopters circled above them in the sky, and tons of volunteers donated their time aiding in the search for Patsy. It would take 2 long days to finally find her. 14-year-old Patsy was discovered by an officer and their dog in Hounslow Heath, and the part that she was found in wasn't even a 5-minute walk away from her home. It was about 1/4 mile. She was found fully clothed. Allegedly, she was found with a pair of tights wrapped around her, acting as almost like restraints. They were wrapped around one of her legs and right up around her neck, becoming a ligature. A ligature that was used to strangle her to death. There were no signs that she had been sexually assaulted, but something that puzzled the detectives was that she was found wearing 2 pairs of underwear. Was this normal for Patsy? We have absolutely no idea, but it was something that stood out. Soon after the discovery of Patsy's body, the phone inside of the family home began to ring. George answered, and on the other end was what sounded like a local teenage boy, and he was making death threats to the family. Despite their efforts, police were never able to track this phone call down or identify the boy on the other end. They weren't able to track down the driver of a blue van that they were interested in either. The van was spotted nearby the family home around the time that Patsy would have been there, so the investigators didn't even want this person to come forward because they necessarily thought they were involved or even a suspect, but maybe they had saw something. Had they seen Patsy? Was she alone? Was she followed by someone? Did anyone go into Hounslow Heath behind her? More than anything, investigators were just hoping that the driver of this blue van would be able to answer at least one of those questions. But again, they were never able to track this person down. Despite all of their best efforts, they got no closer to catching Patsy's killer. In 1996, so 16 years after Patsy's murder, police made their first arrest. They raided the house of a then 33-year-old man who would have been a teenager back in 1980. He was arrested in connection with Patsy's murder, and the police, they wanted to charge him, but the Crown didn't. They didn't think there was enough evidence against him, and so he was released without charge. This was yet another dead end. It wasn't until many years later that investigators began considering someone else, someone who by now was an infamous convicted serial killer. Levi Belfield was responsible for the murder of at least 3 young girls. He was a local of Isleworth, where Patsy was living, but what's even more interesting was that the both of them went to the same school at the same time, and apparently they even dated. What are the chances of that? Apparently when the news broke of Patsy's murder, young Levi became obsessed with it. He was only 12 when the killing happened, but only 1 year later, he was convicted of his first known offence, which was a burglary. But was it really his first? He was known to regularly skive off of school, and Hounslow Heath was his stomping grounds. Chillingly, when it was looked into, it was confirmed that he wasn't at school the day that Patsy was murdered. Ex-partners of Levi would later come out and say that he had a deep-rooted hatred towards blonde women, and he would later target them for his crimes. And can you take a guess what colour hair Patsy had? She was a blonde. When learning about Levi Belfield, Patsy's family were in complete shock. George would say that he immediately knew that the young boy who had called them with the death threats must have been Levi. He has not been confirmed to be a suspect in Patsy's case, but I don't think that he has been 100% ruled out either. The reason that the murder of Patsy Morris got connected to that of Eve Stratford and Lynn Whedon is because Patsy was the third girl to be murdered in the same area as Lynn within the last 5 years. The other two girls were Lynn and Elizabeth Parravicini. The connection with Eve was because allegedly she was found bound with tights, which is very similar to how Eve Stratford was found. Her arms were bound behind her back, and the killer had also tried to bind her legs. As of today, the murder of Patricia Morris is still unsolved. So, what do you think? Are all of these cases connected? Was a serial killer stalking London one who has never been identified, or are there many murderous monsters still out there, different men committing each murder? I don't know which I think is more terrifying. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Don't forget to follow the podcast so that you never miss a new upload. You can find photos and updates over on Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn. I appreciate you for being here, and I'll catch you all on the next one.